Welcome to Kermode Uncut, where it's time for me to catch up with your responses to our latest film club screening, which was, of course, the magnificent Slade in Flame. Now, in the past, we've had titles which have pretty much divided the audience. We had Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, Breathless, the Richard Gere remake, and I really thought that Slade in Flame was going to be a challenge. But the most extraordinary thing is how many of you went along with me and embraced the movie. Here are just a few examples. There was loads and loads of comparisons with things like, people said it's like Ken Loach directing That'll Be the Day. So many people said they were very surprised by just how gritty and downbeat it was. And several people said that they'd never have watched it had it not been a film club screening, which is great. Here's some responses. This from Brian Hutton. When I heard The Good Doctor's next choice for film club, I was sceptical to say the least, and he wasn't the only one. Having been burnt by movie vehicles built around a pop group before, but I was definitely surprised. You could almost smell the nightclubs and the seedy venues the band played, the whiff of cigarettes, Blue Nun and Old Spice. Slade in Flame isn't the jolly romp, as most of these have a habit of being, from the hobbling of Alan Lake to a disturbing message scrawled on a child's wall. It's a darker and more realistic take on the rags to riches story. Now that's what I call the music business. Very, very similar response from Ashley Wetherill. To me, Slade in Flame isn't really a rock and roll movie. It's a slice of life from an era that's rarely been captured this honestly. To sum up, Slade in Flame is everything that movies like That'll Be the Day and Stardust aspired to be, and A Hard Day's Night might have been. Like your good self, I will continue to champion Slade in Flame, as I believe it's a gem that deserves a wider audience. This from Smilex. I have to say I expected this to be something close to the acting standard of The Room, or the comedy sketches of Vic and Bob also came to mind. Many of you brought that up. But the film has so much more depth than you'd expect. It has more in common with Kes and early Mike Leigh works than Spinal Tap. There's melancholia in the story. Some of the scenes filmed in and around the crumbling northern estates are beautifully shot with real poignancy. And one more in this theme, Cammy the Gamer. What got me about Slade in Flame is just how far ahead of its time it feels. He then goes on to compare it with another one of my favourites, Shock Treatment. That spin-off from the Rocky Horror Show, a movie that pretty much foretold the rise of reality TV, and the glamour behind it is actually not that glamorous at all. Both movies foreshadow what's followed since. It's quite bizarre, but it lends credibility to the movie that perhaps it may not have had on its initial release. Loads of you really liked Slade in Flame. Equally rewarding was the fact that many of you dug beneath the surface and found what you considered to be very deep subtext, particularly on the subject of capitalism and class. This from Nick Hughes. The film revealed a lot of depth and complexity. Slade do very well with their roles, but for me, the standout is Tom Conte. Despite being a tough arch capitalist who sees only the money-making potential of the band, but still manages to wring an ounce of sympathy as a family man who tries but fails to stand up to gangsters. This from Babyface Michael. Initially very mixed about the film, but then Tom Conte arrived. And he is Simon Cowell. The film then becomes this very interesting class clash. They speak the same language, live in the same country, but they might as well be two totally different species. It's also a very interesting study of the essence of capitalism. You find a human resource, you exploit it, then when the fruit machine isn't going to give you any more coin, you dump it. The film is just as relevant today as it was then. I think even more so. And this from Information First. Knowing zip about the 70s and its music, what struck me like a blow over the head was the class differences, so harshly in evidence, permeating everything. The train scene was interesting, I reckon, because in a fake movie, it would have been rebellious or haughty triumphalism. This is when they're being served breakfast and they're kind of misbehaving. Whereas it was more subdued and more, I think, highlighting the worlds apart of the group, it seemed to me. A bunch of Midland Northerners who say it as they see it. Give me some of that, they say when they're looking at the eggs. And every time there's some ponderous speech or stage display, you can see them all roll their eyes. Very interesting that so many of you picked it up as being a sort of a story about class. I think that's exactly what it is, and those comparisons with Mike Leigh and Ken Loach are certainly not misplaced. Now, obviously, there were criticisms. I mean, I'd be the first to admit the film isn't perfect. Several of you picked up on the theme that the last act seems somewhat rushed. This, for example, from J Car 73729, catchy name. The arc of the band's success and demise was too hurried in the end. We all know that bands react badly to the pressures of endless marketing, recording and touring, but there were no obvious clues in the storyline as to why Flame fell apart. The arguing in the studio and after concerts came out of nowhere, so rushed and spoiled a reasonably good first hour in the film. And many of you asked whether the film was cut. I mean, certainly the script was trimmed down, but there's certainly never been a longer cut of it. And then, of course, there were the people who just outright didn't like it. And in the interest of balance, here are a few of those. This from Callies. I finally got hold of a copy of this, watched it today, and I can't believe that no one seems to have a bad word to say about it here on the blog. The script is all over the place. There's no character development. The whole movie is very dark, and I mean badly lit, not the tone. There were no laughs, at least between me and my friends, and nothing vaguely dramatic happens. So I was left wondering, what did I just watch? This, similarly from MCOS, until today I'd never seen Slade in Flame. I don't like it. I take the point that they are perhaps bravely lifting the velvet curtain in a show of grit and integrity, not seen in their musical contemporaries on screen. It isn't enough, though, to say, oh, look at this shot of poor Midlands folk contemplating a river of turds in the rain. This is what it's really like when the stage lights go off. That noble gesture aside, I felt that what is left is a film with a few real characters, although Tom Conte lends some depth, some dodgy acting, some cliched and quite tame gangster fare, and not much of a story. And this, from Fisher King, the film stunk so bad, I got a letter of complaint from the council. Got a laugh at the constant reference to its darkness. This is from me. You want dark? Watch Feston, not some bit of 70s retro guff. And as for the Citizen Kane reference, well, I just don't even know where to begin with that. So as you can see, responses were varied, but I have to say that more of you seem to like it than not like it. So what about my claim that it's the Citizen Kane of British pop movies? Well, I'll leave you finally with this from Fake Shemp. Should it now be called the Vertigo of British pop movies? Now, obviously, I'm biased, but it seems to me that there's a lot of enthusiasm here at Kermode Uncut for this film club idea. Certainly, your responses have been fantastic, and loads of you are getting involved. So we're going to pick the pace up a little bit and move on to our next introduction, which will go live next week. And it's also something a bit different. Taking advantage of the fact that I've just been spending time in Shetland, the next introduction is going to include contributions not just from me, but also from the director of our next film club choice. So, next week, the next Kermode Uncut intro is to the majestic gem that is Local Hero.